Renters forever, my dad chuckled, his voice dripping with that familiar, mocking superiority. I sat there, gripping my fork, swallowing the insult just like I had every Sunday for years. Then, from the corner of the table, my 8-year-old nephew's tablet blared a YouTube video about the city's most expensive real estate. "Hey," Tyler said, his innocent eyes wide. "This $15 million penthouse belongs to someone named Mason Richardson." "Uncle Mason, isn't that you?" The entire dining room froze. My mom's silver fork clattered violently against her porcelain plate. The secret I had buried for years was out, and their reactions were about to change my life forever. "Thank you for being here. Please grab a warm glass of water, sit down, and listen to me tell the whole story. To understand why I let my own flesh and blood treat me like a second-class citizen in their home, you have to understand the dynamic of the Richardson family. We were a family obsessed with appearances, milestones, and most importantly, property. If you did not own a home, you were a failure. It was that simple. I was 31 years old, single, and supposedly scraping by in a cramped downtown apartment. That was the story they knew. That was the story I let them believe. The air in my parents' dining room that Sunday evening was thick with the smell of my mom's famous pot roast and the suffocating weight of judgment. My dad, Arthur, sat at the head of the mahogany table like a king presiding over his court. My older brother, Carter, the golden child of the family, sat to his right. Beside Carter was his wife, Jessica, who never missed an opportunity to remind everyone how perfect her life was. And then there was me, sitting near the bottom of the table next to my nephew, Tyler. I was the target practice, the cautionary tale, the punching bag. When Tyler's tablet echoed through the room, the sound cut through the heavy tension like a knife. The YouTuber's overly enthusiastic voice blasted from the tiny speakers, talking about custom marble countertops, panoramic city views, and private elevators. It was a video about the Meridian Tower, the newest, most exclusive residential building in the city. My heart completely stopped. I felt a cold drop of sweat slide down my spine. I looked at Tyler's screen. The video was zooming in on a leaked financial article. I had paid top-tier professionals to bury my identity behind a blind LLC. But somehow, some tech journalist had connected the dots and leaked my name. There it was, displayed in bold letters on a YouTube video with 100,000 views. The buyer of the $15 million penthouse, Mason Richardson. "What did you just say, buddy?" Carter asked, putting his wine glass down. He forced a laugh, but his eyes were darting toward the screen. "The guy who bought the biggest apartment in the sky has the same name as Uncle Mason," Tyler repeated, oblivious to the bomb he had just dropped. My mom, Eleanor, stopped chewing. She stared at me, then at Tyler, and then she slowly reached for her phone resting next to her wine glass. I watched her thumbs tap against the screen, her eyes narrowing as she opened Google. I wanted to speak. I wanted to snatch the phone away, but my jaw was locked. I just sat there waiting for the explosion. While my mom frantically typed into the search bar, my mind pulled me back to 5 years ago. People always ask me why I tolerated the abuse. Why a grown man who had built a massive fortune from the ground up would sit at a table and let people walk all over him. The answer always traces back to the pouring rain, a black umbrella, and a funeral. My grandmother was the only person in the Richardson family who ever looked at me and saw potential. While my parents pushed me to get a safe corporate job with a predictable salary and a matching retirement plan, she bought me my first computer. She encouraged me to build, to code, to dream bigger than a suburban fence. When she passed away, the family gathered around her hospital bed. In her final moments, she pulled me close. Her grip was surprisingly strong for a woman so frail. "Mason," she whispered, her voice rattling in her chest, "promise me you will keep this family together. They are blind, but they are yours. Promise me you won't walk away when things get hard." I made the promise. At 26, broke and grieving, I swore I would show up to every Sunday dinner, every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, no matter how much it hurt. That promise became my prison. After the funeral, I threw myself into my work. I started a cybersecurity firm in a basement that smelled like mold and old takeout. My business partner, David, and I worked 20-hour days. We had no money. I drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door and a heater that only worked half the time. That car became a symbol of my failure in my family's eyes. Every time I pulled into my parents' pristine, brick-paved driveway, that Honda stood out like a sore thumb among Carter's brand new SUV and my dad's luxury sedan. "Still driving that old thing, Mason?" my dad would ask, shaking his head as I walked up the front steps. "You know, if you got a real job, you could afford a car that doesn't leak oil on my driveway." I would just nod and apologize. I never told him that the old thing was a daily reminder of where I came from. Even later, when my bank account had more zeros than I could count, I kept the Honda. I kept the small apartment. I realized early on that my family did not respect the grind. They only respected the finish line. And since I had not crossed their specific version of the finish line, buying a house, getting a traditional promotion, having a predictable salary, I was invisible. I endured their pity because of my grandmother. I sat through the lectures, the eye rolls, and the heavy sighs because I swore I would not fracture the family. But as the years went on, the comments turned from pity to outright contempt. They stopped seeing me as a struggling young man and started seeing me as a lazy burden. They didn't know I was writing software that was protecting the medical records of half the hospitals on the East Coast. They just knew I rented an apartment and drove a beater. And as I sat at the dinner table, watching my mom's screen reflect against her glasses, I realized that my grandmother's promise had cost me my self-respect. I was protecting people who would never protect me. The favoritism was not exactly subtle. It was baked into the foundation of our family. Carter was 2 years older than me, and he never let me forget it. He was the classic overachiever in all the ways my parents understood. He went to a traditional business school, got a job at a massive insurance firm, and married Jessica, a woman who treated social climbing like an Olympic sport. I remember Thanksgiving 3 years ago clearly. It was the exact moment I realized I could never share my true life with them. David and I had just landed our first major corporate client. It was a contract worth 6 figures. For 2 guys working out of a basement, it was life-changing. We had stayed up all night celebrating with cheap pizza and tap water. I was so exhausted but so incredibly proud. I drove to my parents' house for Thanksgiving dinner, my chest puffed out. I finally had something to show them. I finally had a win. We sat down at the table. Before I could even clear my throat to share my news, my dad tapped his glass with a spoon. "Family," he announced, his chest swelling with pride. "We have incredible news to celebrate today. Carter has just received a massive promotion at the firm. He is now the regional vice president." The table erupted. My mom jumped up and hugged Carter, tears in her eyes. Jessica smiled smugly, accepting the congratulations as if she had earned the promotion herself. "That's fantastic, Carter," my dad said, raising his glass. "That salary bump is going to be huge. You are setting up your future perfectly. A house, a solid career, a growing college fund for Tyler. This is what success looks like." They spent 45 minutes talking about Carter's new office, his new parking spot, and his new benefits package. I sat there, genuinely happy for my brother, waiting for a lull in the conversation. When the dessert was finally served, I leaned forward. "Actually, I have some good news too," I said, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. "My company just signed a massive contract. We are going to be providing security for a major retail chain. It is a huge step forward for us." I looked around the table, waiting for the smiles, waiting for my dad to raise his glass again. Instead, there was an awkward silence. Carter raised an eyebrow, picking at his pie. "That's nice, Mason," my mom said, offering a tight, forced smile. "But are you sure they will actually pay you? You know how these freelance things go. People take advantage." "It's not freelance, Mom," I said, my face flushing hot. "It is a corporate contract. It's real." "Well, just make sure you save some of it," my dad chimed in, using his stern lecturing voice. "You never know when this tech bubble is going to burst. Carter has stability. You have a gamble. You need to be careful, Mason. Rent is going up everywhere. Just like that, my victory was squashed, turned into a warning, handled like a child's art project brought home from school, patted on the head and dismissed. They immediately pivoted the conversation back to Jessica and Carter, asking them about their plans to renovate their kitchen. I looked down at my plate, the pie suddenly tasting like ash. They didn't want to hear about my success unless it fit their exact mold. If it wasn't a corporate salary or a piece of real estate, it wasn't real. I decided right then and there, I would never share another milestone with them again. But it wasn't just my family who taught me the harsh reality of how people value money over character. Life made sure to drive that lesson home through Chloe. Chloe was my girlfriend during the hardest years of building the company. She was beautiful, sharp, and for a while she seemed to believe in my vision. We shared my tiny, one-bedroom apartment downtown. The plumbing groaned, the neighbors were loud, and the heating was basically non-existent in February. But I thought we were a team. I thought she saw the long game. I was wrong. About a year before my company truly exploded, the tension between us hit a breaking point. I was working constantly, putting every single dime back into the business. I couldn't afford fancy dinners or weekend getaways. Chloe started making offhand comments. She started talking a lot about her friends. Sarah's husband just got a bonus, she would say while scrolling on her phone. Or, did you see Ryan bought a new condo downtown? The views are incredible. Ryan was a guy we went to college with. He worked in commercial real estate and had a habit of flashing his wealth whenever possible. He was also a guy who had clearly been eyeing Chloe for months. The final fight happened on a Tuesday night. I came home exhausted, my eyes burning from staring at lines of code. I walked into the bedroom to find 2 large suitcases packed on the floor. Chloe was standing by the closet, folding a sweater. "What is this?" I asked, my voice suddenly very quiet. "I can't do this anymore, Mason," she said, not looking at me. "I am turning 30 next year. I am living in a shoebox. We have no savings, no property, no future. I need stability." "We are building a future," I pleaded, stepping closer. "The company is so close to a breakthrough, Chloe. Just give me a little more time." She finally looked up, and the coldness in her eyes made my stomach drop. "You have been saying that for 3 years. It is a pipe dream, Mason. You are a dreamer. But dreamers don't pay mortgages. Dreamers just rent forever." She actually used the word, rent, like it was a disease. "I heard about Jenny's divorce last week," Chloe continued, her voice hardening. "They are fighting over custody, fighting over assets. It made me realize I don't even have assets to fight over with you. I have nothing to show for the last 4 years." "So you are leaving me because I don't own a house?" I asked, the betrayal tasting bitter in my mouth. "Because I don't have a high salary on paper? I am leaving because Ryan asked me to move in with him," she said flatly. "Into his condo. He has a plan, Mason. He has real things." She grabbed her bags and walked out the door. She chose the guy with the condo. She chose the visible assets over the man standing right in front of her. That night, I sat alone in the dark apartment. I didn't cry. I just felt a profound, heavy shift inside my chest. Chloe taught me the exact same lesson my family did. People only respect you for what you can show them. I promised myself 2 things that night. First, I would build an empire so massive it would cast a shadow over everything Ryan ever touched. Second, when I finally made it, I would hide it. I would use my apparent poverty as a filter. Anyone who couldn't respect Mason the renter would never get the chance to meet Mason the millionaire. 18 months after Chloe walked out, the world shifted on its axis. David and I had developed a proprietary encryption algorithm that effectively neutralized a massive ransomware threat targeting the financial sector. We went from a struggling startup to the most sought-after cybersecurity firm in the country virtually overnight. The phone didn't stop ringing. Banks, federal agencies, Fortune 500 companies, they all wanted our software. Then Microsoft came knocking. I will never forget sitting in that glass-walled conference room in Seattle. I was wearing a cheap suit I had bought off the rack, sitting across from executives wearing watches that cost more than my parents' house. They slid a folder across the table. Inside was a contract for the acquisition of our algorithm and a controlling stake in the company. The number printed on the bottom of the page was $250 million. I kept my face perfectly neutral. I read the contract, nodded, and shook their hands. But when David and I got back to the hotel room, we lost our minds. We yelled, we jumped, we drank champagne straight from the bottle. I was 29 years old, and I had more money than my entire bloodline had generated in a century. When the ink dried and the funds hit my account, the first call I made wasn't to my dad. It wasn't to my mom. It was to my lawyer. I need to structure this wealth so perfectly that a forensic accountant couldn't tie it to my name. I told him over the phone. I want trusts, I want holding companies, I want blind LLCs. Total anonymity. He advised me on wealth preservation. He set up an LLC in Delaware, routing the ownership through a trust. When it was time to buy a home, I didn't want a suburban house with a white picket fence. I wanted the sky. I bought the penthouse at Meridian Tower, the crown jewel of the city skyline, entirely in cash. $15.2 million. It was a fortress of glass and steel, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. I hired the best contractors to install state-of-the-art smart home technology. It was my sanctuary, a place where I was the king, not the disappointment. But I kept my downtown apartment. I kept the 10-year-old Honda. I lived a double life. By day, I was negotiating multi-million-dollar security contracts with international banks. By night, I was driving the squeaky Honda to my parents' house, wearing faded jeans and a plain gray t-shirt, bracing myself for the inevitable lectures about my poor life choices. Felt good, in a dark, twisted way. Every time my dad insulted my financial status, every time Carter bragged about his salary, every time Jessica rolled her eyes at my shoes, I felt a quiet, powerful satisfaction. They were showing me exactly who they were. They were exposing their shallowness, their greed, and their toxic conditionally based love, completely unaware that the man they were insulting could buy their entire neighborhood with a wire transfer. The mask was perfect. The secret was safe. Until some overzealous tech journalist decided to dig into the public records of the Microsoft acquisition, trace the registered agent of my holding company, and connect it to a high-end real estate transaction. Until that journalist published an obscure article that a flashy real estate YouTuber decided to use for his top 10 video. And until my 8-year-old nephew, bored out of his mind at a family dinner, decided to click play. Let's go back to that Sunday. Just a few hours before the dining room table became a war zone. I pulled my old Honda Civic up to the curb, a block away from my parents' house. I killed the engine and sat in the quiet car, the stale smell of old coffee and dust filling my lungs. My phone was pressed to my ear. I was finishing a call with Mr. Sterling, the CEO of a major international logistics firm. Mason, I have to tell you, the board is thrilled with the security audit your team ran. Mr. Sterling's deep, commanding voice came through the speaker. You caught vulnerabilities our in-house guys missed for years. You saved us millions, son. Your brain is a massive asset. I appreciate that, Mr. Sterling, I replied smoothly, leaning back against the cracked fabric of the driver's seat. We will have the final patch deployed by Tuesday morning. 0 downtime. Excellent. Let's do golf next month. My treat. Looking forward to it. I hung up the phone. For 5 minutes, I was Mason Richardson, the cybersecurity titan. The man Fortune 500 CEOs called, Sir. The man who controlled a digital empire. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. I took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and actively changed my posture. I let my shoulders slump. I softened my jaw. I took off my expensive, custom-made watch and locked it in the glove compartment. I stepped out of the car, shutting the dented door with a loud, metallic clank. I was putting on the mask. I was stepping into the role of the struggling younger brother. The walk up my parents' paved driveway always felt like walking the Green Mile. Carter's pristine, detailing waxed BMW was parked right near the front door, gleaming aggressively in the late afternoon sun. I walked past it, feeling that familiar knot of anxiety form in my stomach. The promise to my grandmother echoed in my head. Keep them together. They are yours. I pushed open the heavy oak front door. The house smelled of roasting meat and expensive air freshener. I'm here, I called out, slipping off my worn sneakers. In the kitchen, Mason, my mom's voice drifted out. I walked in to find my dad pouring a heavy glass of scotch, while Carter and Jessica leaned against the marble island, drinking wine. Well, look who finally made it, Carter said, flashing a bright, perfect smile that didn't reach his eyes. Car didn't break down on the highway again, did it? No, it ran fine, I said quietly, forcing a small smile. You really need to look into financing something reliable, Mason, my dad said, handing Carter the scotch bottle. Interest rates aren't terrible right now. If your credit is decent, which, well, who knows? But a man needs reliable transport. I'll look into it, Dad, I said automatically. The script was already running. The play had begun. I grabbed a glass of tap water and stood on the edge of the circle, listening to them discuss things they believed were vastly out of my intellectual and financial reach. I was the ghost in the room, present but entirely insignificant. We moved into the dining room. My mom carried the massive pot roast, setting it in the center of the table like a trophy. We all took our assigned seats. Tyler, my nephew, sat next to me. He gave me a quick high five under the table. Tyler was the only one in the house who just liked me for me. He didn't care about my bank account. He just liked that I played video games with him. Almost immediately, the conversation shifted to the family's favorite competitive sport, real estate. So, Dad, I wanted to tell you, Carter started, slicing aggressively into a piece of beef. We closed on the duplex in Riverside yesterday. The papers are signed. My dad's face lit up like a Christmas tree. Carter, that is phenomenal news. A duplex. That is a brilliant move. You live in one side, rent the other, and let your tenant pay your mortgage. That is how you build equity. Exactly, Jessica chimed in, tossing her perfectly highlighted hair over her shoulder. We wanted to diversify our portfolio. The stock market is great, but physical property is where true wealth lives. You can touch it. You can control it. She took a sip of her wine and let her eyes drift deliberately across the table until they locked onto me. It's just the smart thing to do, Jessica continued, her voice dripping with fake concern. Unlike some people who just throw their money away on rent every single month. I read an article the other day about how downtown rents are skyrocketing. It must be so stressful, Mason, never knowing when your landlord is going to price you out. The table grew quiet, letting the insult hang in the air. I focused very hard on my mashed potatoes. I used my fork to create little geometric patterns in the potatoes. I thought about the deed to my penthouse, sitting safely in a fireproof safe in my lawyer's office. I thought about the fact that the property tax on my penthouse alone was probably double Carter's entire mortgage on his new duplex. I'm managing fine, Jessica, I said evenly, keeping my eyes down. My landlord is reasonable. Carter scoffed, an ugly, dismissive sound. Nobody is managing fine paying rent, Mason. You are paying someone else's mortgage. You are literally burning cash. It is financial suicide. If you had just listened to me 3 years ago and bought a starter home in the suburbs, you'd have 50 grand in equity by now. Not everyone has the discipline for a 30-year mortgage, Carter. My mom sighed, passing a bowl of green beans. Mason has always been a bit transient. He likes his freedom, even if it means having nothing to show for it. Transient. Freedom. Nothing to show for it. The words were designed to hurt, and despite my armor, they still stung. They were talking to me like I was an irresponsible teenager who couldn't balance a checkbook. I felt the familiar urge to stand up, to pull out my phone, to show them the bank app that would make them all choke on their wine. But I didn't. I clenched my jaw. I remembered Chloe's face when she walked out. I remembered that they didn't actually care about my well-being. They cared about feeling superior to me. Revealing my wealth wouldn't make them respect me. It would just make them want a piece of it. So I stayed silent. I let them have their moment. Sensing blood in the water, my dad decided it was time for his grand sermon. He loved an audience, and he especially loved using me as the negative example in his life lessons. He set down his fork and wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, preparing to hold court. "You need to listen to your brother, Mason," my dad said, his voice dropping into that deep, authoritative register he used when he wanted to sound profound. "Real estate is the foundation of the American dream. It is about building generational wealth. It is about creating an inheritance for your children, like Tyler." He gestured to Tyler, who was busy pushing a piece of roast beef around his plate, completely ignoring the adults. "You see, an inheritance isn't just money," my dad continued, pointing his butter knife in my direction. "It is a legacy of hard work and smart choices. Carter is building a legacy. When I look at him, I see the future of this family. When I look at you," he paused. He actually paused for dramatic effect. "I just see a guy paying off some stranger's retirement," he finished, shaking his head. "Renters forever, Mason. That is your path. You will wake up at 60 years old with a box full of rent receipts and nothing to leave behind. No property, no legacy, no respect. Renters forever." The phrase echoed in the dining room. Carter snickered softly. Jessica smiled into her wine glass. My mom looked at me with an expression of profound, tragic pity. A hot spike of pure, unfiltered anger shot through my chest. The disrespect was so casual, so deeply ingrained. They had absolutely no idea who was sitting at their table. They had no idea that I could buy the bank that held Carter's duplex mortgage. They had no idea that my legacy was already written in code that protected national infrastructure. I slowly placed my fork down on the plate. I took a slow breath, doing the mental math of my net worth. $250 million in liquid capital. A $15 million home. A growing portfolio of tech stocks. I recited the numbers in my head like a prayer, using them to anchor my temper. "I appreciate the advice, Dad," I said, my voice dangerously calm, devoid of any emotion. "I will keep it in mind. You always say that." My mom sighed, sounding exhausted by my very existence. "But you never take action. Sometimes I worry you are just going to drift through life entirely." I looked directly at her. "I'm not drifting, Mom. I know exactly where I am going." They took my calmness as submission. My dad went back to eating, satisfied that he had established the hierarchy once again. Carter leaned over to Jessica and whispered something that made her giggle. The heavy, oppressive atmosphere of the Sunday dinner settled back into its normal rhythm. They thought the execution was over. They thought they had successfully put me in my place. But they weren't paying attention to the end of the table. They weren't paying attention to the 8-year-old boy who was tired of the grown-up talk. Tyler hated the property lectures. He was 8. He cared about Minecraft, superheroes, and loud noises. While my dad was delivering his speech about generational wealth and inheritance, Tyler had quietly slipped his iPad out from under his chair and placed it on his lap. Usually, my mom or Jessica would scold him for having electronics at the table, but they were so focused on tearing me down that they completely ignored him. Tyler had his volume turned all the way down, but not muted. He was scrolling through YouTube, looking for something flashy. He tapped on a video with a neon thumbnail. I could just barely hear the hyperactive, fast-paced voice of the YouTuber leaking out from the tiny speakers. "Insane luxury, guys. Today we are looking at the top 10 most expensive properties in the city. You won't believe the price tag on number 1. I glanced over at him. "Whatcha watching, Ty?" I whispered, grateful for any distraction from my family's smug faces. "Cool houses," Tyler whispered back, his eyes glued to the screen. "Look at this one, Uncle Mason. It has an indoor pool that looks like a cave." "That's awesome, buddy." I smiled, taking a sip of water. I turned my attention back to my plate, trying to block out Carter, who was now explaining the tax benefits of property depreciation to my dad. I let the drone of their voices wash over me. I was just waiting for the clock to hit 8 p.m. so I could politely excuse myself, get back in my Honda, and drive back to my real life. From the corner of my ear, I heard the YouTuber's voice shift in tone, getting louder and more dramatic as the video reached its climax. And finally, coming in at number 1, the absolute crown jewel of the city skyline. The Penthouse at Meridian Tower. This place just sold for a mind-bending $15.2 million. Guys in cash. It features wraparound floor-to-ceiling glass, a private elevator, and a smart home security system that is basically out of a spy movie. Tyler was leaning closer to the screen. Whoa, he breathed. $15 million. That's like 100 lifetimes of allowance. Yeah, that's a lot of money, I murmured, my brain suddenly snagging on the words. Meridian Tower, 15.2 million. Smart home security. A cold prickle of unease started at the base of my neck. What were the odds? It's a big city. There are other expensive penthouses. But then Tyler tapped the screen to pause the video. He squinted at the text displaying on the screen. The YouTuber was showing a screenshot of a financial blog, highlighting a specific paragraph. Tyler frowned, sounding out the words carefully. The buyer used a blind LLC, but leaked documents show the true owner is a tech CEO named. Tyler looked up from the screen. He looked at me, his eyes wide with innocent confusion. He looked around the table at the adults who had suddenly gone dead silent. He unpaused the video, and the YouTuber's voice rang out, loud and clear in the quiet dining room. The true owner is reported to be tech billionaire Mason Richardson. Talk about a massive flex. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that rings in your ears. It felt as though all the oxygen had been sucked out of the dining room in a single second. No one moved. Carter's fork was suspended halfway between his plate and his mouth. Jessica's wine glass was frozen just below her lips. My dad sat perfectly rigid, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. My mom was staring blankly at Tyler, trying to process the auditory anomaly that had just occurred. Tyler, completely unaware of the nuclear bomb he had just detonated, looked directly at me. "Hey, Uncle Mason," Tyler said, his voice bright and loud. "That guy has the exact same name as you, Mason Richardson, and he bought a $15 million house. Isn't that crazy?" My brain kicked into overdrive. Panic, pure adrenaline-fueled panic, flooded my veins. My carefully constructed double life, the shield I had spent years building to protect myself from these exact people, was collapsing in real time. It's a common name, Tyler," I stammered, my voice sounding thin and unnatural. "Just a coincidence." "Turn the volume down, buddy. We are at the dinner table." Carter let out a sharp, barking laugh. It sounded forced, nervous. "Yeah, Ty, turn that garbage off. Obviously, it's not Uncle Mason. Uncle Mason can barely afford his rent, let alone a $15 million penthouse. It's just some rich tech guy with the same name." "Actually," Tyler said, his brow furrowing as he looked back at the screen, proving once again that 8-year-olds have zero filter and impeccable reading comprehension. "The video says he owns a cybersecurity company, Richardson Software Solutions. Doesn't Uncle Mason work in computers?" The forced smile on Carter's face vanished instantly. The color began to drain from his cheeks. My dad leaned forward, his elbows resting heavily on the mahogany table. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. "Mason," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "What is the boy talking about? What is Richardson Software Solutions?" "It's just a coincidence, Dad." I lied, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Like Carter said, it's a common name. I just do consulting. Small-time stuff. It says here he sold part of it to Microsoft." Tyler chimed in again, aggressively scrolling through the video description. "For $250 million. "Tyler, put the iPad away right now," Jessica snapped, her voice shrill and panicked. She reached over and yanked the tablet out of her son's hands. slamming it face down on the table. Tyler jumped, looking startled and hurt. "I was just reading it," Tyler mumbled, shrinking back into his chair. "Nobody buys a $15 million property in cash," my dad said, shaking his head rapidly as if trying to physically dislodge the information from his brain. "That's absurd. That's billionaire money. That's not Mason." He pointed at me again, but this time his finger was trembling slightly. "Look at him. He drives a rusted Honda. He wears cheap shoes. He doesn't have $250 million. It was the ultimate insult, delivered in a moment of sheer denial. He couldn't reconcile the son he loved to belittle with the staggering numbers Tyler was reading. It was fundamentally impossible in his worldview. But my mom wasn't laughing. She wasn't denying it. She was terrifyingly quiet. I watched my mom slowly reach for her phone. Her hand was shaking so badly she knocked over the salt shaker. It spilled across the polished wood, tiny white grains scattering like broken glass. She didn't even notice. "Mom, leave it alone," I said, my voice dropping an octave. A warning. "Put the phone down." She ignored me. She unlocked her screen, her thumb moving rapidly. "Eleanor, what are you doing?" my dad asked, his voice tight with rising anxiety. "Don't entertain this nonsense. It's an internet rumor. A mistake." "I am just looking," she whispered, her eyes glued to the glowing screen. The dining room felt like a pressure cooker. I could hear the antique grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Tick, tock. Every second felt like an hour. I gripped the edge of the table beneath the tablecloth, my knuckles turning white. My secret was bleeding out right in front of me, and I was entirely powerless to stop it. "Okay," my mom murmured, reading off her screen. "I searched Mason Richardson Microsoft acquisition. There are dozens of articles. They probably all cite the same fake source," Carter insisted, his voice cracking slightly. He was sweating. The golden child was sweating because the universe was suddenly not making sense. "Forbes?" my mom said, her voice catching in her throat. "This is an article from Forbes. Tech prodigy Mason Richardson sells controlling stake in cybersecurity firm for $250 million. She swiped her finger across the screen, pulling up an image. She stared at the photo. Then, very slowly, she raised her head and looked directly at me. Her face was entirely devoid of color. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. "It's a picture of you," she whispered. The words barely made it past her lips. "Let me see that," Carter demanded, snatching the phone from her hand. He stared at the screen. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked from the phone to me, then back to the phone. The arrogance, the smug superiority that had defined his entire personality for 30 years, evaporated in an instant. "Carter?" Jessica asked, her voice trembling. "Is it him?" Carter didn't answer. He just slowly lowered the phone to the table. My mom's heavy silver fork, the one she had been holding loosely in her left hand, finally slipped from her fingers. It hit her porcelain plate with a sharp, violent crack. The sound echoed in the silent room like a gunshot. "You," my dad stammered, staring at me with wide, horrified eyes. "You own a $15 million penthouse? You have $250 million. The jig was up. The mask had cracked and shattered into a million pieces. The years of hiding, the years of biting my tongue, the years of driving that terrible car and living in a tiny apartment just to avoid their toxic judgment. It was all over. I looked around the table at the faces of the people who had mocked me just 10 minutes prior. I saw shock. I saw disbelief. But beneath all of that, lurking just beneath the surface of their widened eyes, I saw something darker, something I had always feared. I didn't say a word. I just slowly let go of the table, sat back in my chair, and waited for the storm to hit. The heavy silence in the dining room shattered the moment my dad decided he had found the only logical explanation. He slammed both of his hands flat against the table. The silverware rattled. The water glasses shook. "What kind of criminal operation are you running, Mason?" my dad demanded. His face was turning a dangerous shade of red. The veins in his neck were popping out against his collar. I looked at him, genuinely taken aback. "Excuse me? Do not play dumb with me," he roared, pointing that same trembling finger right at my face. "People do not just wake up with $250 million. People who drive 10-year-old cars and rent cheap apartments do not buy $15 million penthouses in cash. You are laundering money, or you are running some kind of illegal scam on the internet. Who did you steal from, Mason?" I stared at the man who raised me, faced with undeniable proof of my success. His mind immediately defaulted to assuming I was a felon. He would rather believe I was a criminal facing federal prison than admit I was more successful than his golden child. "You think I am a criminal?" I asked, my voice dropping so low it barely carried over the table. "I think you have always been reckless." My mom chimed in, her voice shaking. She was clutching her napkin like a lifeline. "We told you to get a safe job with a regular salary. We told you to be practical. Now you have dragged this family's name into something dangerous. The FBI could be monitoring this house right now." Carter finally found his voice. "Mason, if you are in trouble, you need to call a lawyer immediately. You can't hide illicit funds in luxury real estate. They will seize everything. You are going to ruin all of us." They were feeding off each other, building a completely fictional narrative of my downfall, and they were finding comfort in it. It was easier for them to picture me in handcuffs than to picture me in a boardroom. That was the moment the final thread holding me to them snapped. The promise I made to my grandmother in that hospital room evaporated. I had kept the family together. I had shown up. I had taken their abuse, their mocking jokes, and their endless lectures. But this was the line. I pushed my chair back. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. I stood up slowly to my full height. The dining room instantly went dead silent again. I reached into the inside pocket of my cheap jacket. Carter actually flinched, pulling back in his chair as if I were about to pull out a weapon. Instead, I pulled out my wallet. It was a worn leather bifold. I opened it, pulled out a solid black, heavy metal credit card, and tossed it onto the center of the table. It landed right next to the gravy boat with a solid, undeniable thud. I followed it up with my business card. It was thick matte black paper with silver embossed lettering. "Look at it," I commanded. My voice wasn't loud, but it held a terrifying authority that I normally reserved for hostile board meetings. "Pick it up and look at it, Carter." Carter hesitated, then slowly reached out and picked up the business card. "Read the title," I said. Carter swallowed hard. My dad's jaw worked silently. The anger in his eyes was rapidly being replaced by something else. Fear. Intimidation. "I bought the penthouse at Meridian Tower because I wanted it," I continued, turning my gaze to my mom. "I paid cash because I can. I drive that old Honda and I rent that cheap apartment because I knew exactly what you would do if you found out I had money. Mason, we are your family," my mom whispered, fresh tears pooling in her eyes. "Why would you hide this from us? We would have celebrated you." I let out a harsh, bitter laugh. It was the loudest sound in the room. "Celebrated me? Are you joking? When I landed my first corporate contract, you told me to be careful because freelance work is a scam. When I worked 20-hour days to build my dream, you called me a failure because I didn't have a mortgage. You never cared about my happiness. You only cared about my visible assets." I turned to Carter and Jessica. They were sitting perfectly still, looking like two deer caught in the headlights of a massive truck. "Carter," I said, my tone dripping with pure ice, "congratulations on the duplex. It is a very sensible investment. You should be proud. But do not ever, in your entire life, speak down to me about finances again. The property taxes on my balcony alone cost more than your entire salary." Carter looked down at his plate. The golden child was entirely broken. He couldn't even meet my eyes. Jessica was staring at the black metal credit card on the table, a strange, calculating hunger flashing in her eyes that made me sick to my stomach. "For 5 years, I sat at this table and let you belittle me. I said, addressing all of them. I did it because I made a promise to Grandma. I promised her I wouldn't let this family fall apart. I thought keeping my mouth shut was the price of admission to this family. But I am done paying it. I reached down and grabbed my wallet, slipping the black card and the business card back inside. I put the wallet in my pocket and grabbed my keys off the counter. You wanted me to be a homeowner, I said, walking toward the front door. I didn't look back. Well, I am. But none of you are ever invited. I opened the heavy oak door and stepped out into the cool November air. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment one below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. I walked down the driveway and got into my rusted 10-year-old Honda. The engine sputtered slightly before roaring to life, the familiar rattling sound vibrating through the steering wheel. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. I didn't check the rearview mirror. I just drove. The city streets were empty and quiet. As I drove further away from the suburbs and closer to the downtown skyline, a strange sensation washed over me. My chest felt incredibly light. For the first time in over a decade, the massive, suffocating weight of my family's expectations was completely gone. I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to shrink myself to make them feel big. I rolled the window down, letting the freezing night air hit my face. I laughed aloud in the empty car. It was a messy, loud, purely joyful laugh. I was free. My phone vibrated in the cup holder. Then it vibrated again. And again. I glanced down. It was blowing up with texts and missed calls. My mom, my dad, even Carter. I ignored them all. I drove back to my small rented apartment, packed a single duffel bag with my essentials, and left the keys on the kitchen counter. My lease was up at the end of the month anyway. It was time to go home. I spent the night in a luxury hotel downtown, ordering room service and staring out at the city lights. The next morning, I woke up, poured a cup of expensive coffee, and finally looked at my phone. The messages were exactly what I expected. The shock had worn off and the entitlement had set in. My mom had sent a massive paragraph at 2 a.m. Mason, I cannot believe you would deceive us like this. We are your parents. We sacrificed everything for you. To sit there and let us worry about your future while you are sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars is incredibly selfish. You know your father and I still owe a massive amount on this house. A good son would have shared his blessings. Call me immediately. I just shook my head. Not a single word of apology for calling me a failure. Not a single word of regret for accusing me of being a money launderer. Just immediate anger that I hadn't used my fortune to pay off their debts. Then, I opened a text from a number I rarely interacted with. It was from Jessica, my sister-in-law, the woman who, just yesterday, had mocked me for throwing my money away on rent. The text read, Hey Mason. Wow, last night was crazy. I always told Carter you were the smartest guy in the room. Listen, I have this amazing business idea for an upscale boutique. The bank is giving me a hard time with the loan. Since you have so much liquid capital right now, I was wondering if we could meet for coffee? I only need about $300K to get it off the ground. We are family, right? P.S. Please do not mention this to Carter, his pride gets in the way. I stared at Jessica's text, reading it 3 times just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of this woman. Less than 12 hours ago, she was treating me like dirt on the bottom of her designer shoes. Now, she was sliding into my messages, asking for $300,000 and calling me the smartest guy in the room. It was the ultimate vindication. Any lingering guilt I felt about hiding my success vanished completely in that hotel room. If I had told them about the money 5 years ago, this is exactly what my life would have become. I would have been a walking ATM, a human bank account for their failed business ideas, their luxury vacations, and their endless appetite for status symbols. They wouldn't have loved me more. They just would have used me constantly. I didn't reply to Jessica. I didn't reply to my mom. I blocked their numbers, called my lawyer, and told him to finalize the paperwork for the Penthouse move-in. I had an empire to run, and I no longer had the time or the energy to play their games. For the next month, I lived in total silence. I threw myself into the final renovations of the Penthouse. I bought new clothes that actually fit me perfectly. I traded the rusted Honda for a sleek, black Porsche 911. I stopped hiding. If someone asked what I did for a living, I told them the truth. I let my family sit in the silence. I knew the silence was driving them crazy. They knew where I worked, but they couldn't get past the corporate security at my office building. They knew my phone number, but it went straight to voicemail. They were completely locked out of my kingdom. But I knew the confrontation was inevitable. You can't just drop a $250 million bomb on a family like mine and expect them to walk away quietly. They were going to try to reclaim control. They were going to try to get their hands on the prize. I was ready for them. It happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, exactly 1 month after the disastrous Sunday dinner. I was standing in my newly finished penthouse. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, panoramic view of the storm rolling in over the harbor. The custom marble floors gleamed. The smart home system played soft jazz music through invisible speakers. The intercom on the wall beeped. I walked over and pressed the button. Yes, Mr. Richardson. The voice of Jenkins, the building's head of security, came through the speaker. Jenkins was a former military man who took his job very seriously. I apologize for the interruption, sir. I have a group of people down here in the lobby. An older couple and a younger couple with a child. They are claiming to be your family. The older gentleman is becoming quite loud and demanding to be let up. I smiled. Right on time. It is all right, Jenkins, I said calmly. They are my family. Send them up. But Jenkins. Yes, sir. Do not let them wander. Escort them directly to my private elevator. Understood, Mr. Richardson. I smoothed the front of my tailored shirt, walked over to the massive kitchen island, and poured myself a glass of sparkling water. The game was about to begin, but this time we were playing on my turf, and I made the rules. The private elevator doors opened with a soft, expensive chime directly into my foyer. I stood by the kitchen island, watching as my family stepped out. The transformation in their body language was entirely fascinating. These were people who had always carried themselves with arrogant confidence. But as they stepped onto the imported Italian marble and looked up at the 20-foot vaulted ceilings, they shrank. My dad stepped out first. He looked around the massive living space, taking in the custom art, the grand piano, and the sweeping views of the city skyline. His jaw literally dropped. The man who always had a speech prepared was utterly speechless. My mom followed closely behind, gripping her purse with both hands like a shield. Carter and Jessica stepped out last, pulling young Tyler by the hand. Carter looked physically ill. The duplex he was so incredibly proud of could probably fit entirely inside my living room. Jessica's eyes were darting everywhere, calculating the cost of every single piece of furniture. Only Tyler looked happy. "Whoa!" he yelled, his voice echoing in the massive space. "Uncle Mason, your house is like a spaceship." "Hey, buddy." I smiled warmly at him. "Glad you like it." I didn't offer them a drink. I didn't invite them to sit down on the custom leather sofas. I just stood there waiting for them to speak. My dad finally found his voice. He tried to puff out his chest, attempting to reclaim the role of the dominant patriarch. "Well, Mason, it is very hard to get a hold of you these days. We had to come down here and deal with your security guards just to see our own son." "I have been busy, Dad," I replied, taking a slow sip of my water. "Running a global company takes a lot of time. We need to talk about what happened," my mom said, stepping forward. She put on her best wounded mother face. "You walked out on us. You blocked our numbers. We have been sick with worry. We are family, Mason. Family does not keep secrets like this." "You weren't sick with worry, Mom," I said flatly, refusing to play into the guilt trip. You were angry that you couldn't control me anymore. You were angry that I didn't pay off your house. We raised you, my dad barked, his face flushing red again. We put a roof over your head. If you have this kind of money, the respectable thing to do is make sure your parents are taken care of. Your mother wants to renovate the kitchen, and Carter has a massive mortgage on that new property. You could clear all our debts with the stroke of a pen and not even notice it. There it was. The demand. Stripped of all the fake concern, it always came down to the cash. I nodded slowly. I could write a check right now that would pay off this entire family's debt. But I won't. Carter finally spoke up, his voice tight with bitter jealousy. So you are just going to hoard it? You are going to live up here in this glass tower and watch your family struggle. You aren't struggling, Carter, I shot back, locking eyes with my older brother. You make a great salary. You bought a duplex. Remember? You are building generational wealth. You don't need my money. Carter opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. I had trapped him with his own arrogant words. Listen to me very carefully, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the large room. I looked at each of them in turn. For my entire adult life, you told me I was a failure. You mocked my car, you mocked my apartment, you mocked my career. You made it abundantly clear that my value as a human being was tied directly to my physical assets. I put my glass down on the marble counter. The sharp click made them all jump. Well, now I have the assets, I continued. But the rules haven't changed. I am the exact same man I was 5 years ago when I was eating instant noodles in a basement. The only difference is the bank account. If you couldn't respect me then, you do not get to profit off me now. Mason, please, Jessica interrupted, stepping forward with a desperate, pleading smile. We made mistakes. We admit that, but we can start over. Carter and I were talking, and we really think a small family loan could, Jessica. I cut her off instantly. If you finish that sentence, I will have Jenkins escort you out of this building immediately. There will be no business loans. There will be no mortgages paid. I am not your bank. I am not your safety net for bad financial decisions. The absolute finality in my voice shut her down completely. She stepped back behind Carter, her face pale. Are you cutting us out? My mom asked, her voice cracking for real this time. She finally realized the power dynamic had permanently shifted. She had zero leverage. I am not cutting you out, I replied, softening my tone just a fraction. If someone gets sick, I will pay the hospital bills. If there is a true emergency, I will be there. But the Sunday dinners where you tear me down for sport are over. The lectures are over. You are welcome to be part of my life, but it will be on my terms. With absolute respect. My dad looked down at his shoes. He looked old. The realization that he could no longer dominate his youngest son had physically deflated him. Suddenly, Tyler broke the tension. He ran across the room and wrapped his arms around my waist, hugging me tight. The video said your company stops bad guys from hacking hospitals, Tyler said, looking up at me with massive, hero-worshipping eyes. Are you a superhero, Uncle Mason? I looked down at my nephew. He was the only innocent person in the room. He didn't care about the marble floors or the bank accounts. He just thought his uncle was cool. I knelt down so I was eye level with him. I'm just a guy who likes computers, Ty. But I do try to help people. I looked up at Carter and Jessica. There is one check I will write. I spoke with my lawyer yesterday. I am setting up an independent trust for Tyler's college fund. It is fully funded. Whatever university he wants to go to, anywhere in the world, it is paid for. Carter's eyes widened. Jessica gasped. But, I added, holding up a finger, my voice turning to steel. The trust is managed completely by my legal team. Neither of you will have access to a single penny of it. It is for his education, and his education only. They didn't argue. They couldn't. I had just secured their son's future, and I had done it in a way that completely bypassed their control. Thank you, Uncle Mason. Tyler cheered, hugging my neck. You're welcome, buddy. I smiled, hugging him back. I stood back up and looked at my parents and my brother. The silence in the penthouse was heavy, but it wasn't toxic anymore. It was the silence of a battle that had been fought and definitively won. "Jenkins is waiting in the lobby," I said gently, pointing toward the private elevator. "Drive safe." They filed onto the elevator in silence. My dad didn't look at me. Carter kept his eyes on the floor. My mom gave me a hesitant, small wave before the stainless steel doors slid shut, sealing them away. I stood alone in the foyer for a moment, listening to the soft hum of the elevator descending. Then, I walked across the massive living room, opened the heavy glass doors, and stepped out onto the wraparound terrace. The storm had passed, leaving the evening air crisp and clean. The city stretched out below me, a sprawling ocean of glittering lights. I leaned against the glass railing and took a deep breath. For years, I thought having money meant I had to prove something to the people who doubted me. I thought the ultimate victory would be rubbing their noses in my success. But standing there, looking down at the world, I realized the truth. True wealth isn't about buying a $15 million penthouse. It isn't about driving a Porsche or wearing custom suits. True wealth is the absolute freedom to choose who gets to sit at your table. It is the power to draw a line in the sand and say, "You are not allowed to cross this." I didn't hate my family. I didn't want to see them suffer. But I no longer needed their validation to survive. The little boy who craved his dad's approval was gone. The young man who let his brother insult him just to keep the peace was gone. In their place was a man who knew exactly what he was worth. And my worth was never defined by the car I drove or the property I owned. It was defined by my mind, my resilience, and my refusal to let toxic people dictate my reality. I stayed on the balcony for a long time, watching the headlights move along the highway in the distance. I was finally home. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was a heavy one, but it is my truth, and it feels incredibly good to finally share it out loud. I hope this resonated with you in some way. Family dynamics can be incredibly complicated, and sometimes the hardest thing we have to do in life is set boundaries with the people who share our last name. You do not have to tolerate disrespect just because it comes from blood. Your peace of mind is worth more than their approval. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to hide your success? Or step away from family members who only wanted to tear you down? Tell me about it in the comments below. I read as many as I can, and I love hearing your stories. Now, if you are still here, listening to my voice right at the very end of this video, I have a special request for you. I want you to go down to the comments and simply type the letter W. That W stands for winner. It is the secret code for the 1% Club. It is my way of knowing exactly who the absolute best members of this community are, the ones who have the patience and the focus to stick with a story until the very last word. When I see that W, I know you are a winner. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want to hear more stories like this, hit subscribe and follow along. We have a lot more to talk about. Take care of yourselves, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next one.